Masechet Megillah Daf. We're going to start on the second last line of Daf Tezayin Amud Beis. In the last sugya we were discussing the Mailos of Talmud Torah. Now the Gemara is going to bring another memra. Omar Aber, Omar Rabbi Yitzchok bar Shmuel bar Marta. Godel Talmud Torah Yosem Mikibud Ava'im. There's a Maila of Limud Torah even greater than Kibud Ava'im. Shekol Oison Shonim. Shahoyo Yaakov Avinu bebeis Eiver, when he was learning in the yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever, lo inena, she was not punished for not being close to his parents to be able to be mechabed them. The Omar Mar, Lama nimnu shnoisov shel Yishmael. Why does the Torah reckon out how many years Yishmael lived? We know that Yishmael was a Rasha, and we have no interest in knowing how long he was alive for. The Torah even asks that the Gemara in Bava Basra, Tezayin Amud Aleph, says Yishmael did tshuva. Marashah says it's true he did tshuva at the end of his life, but Tachlis is, for almost all his life he was a Rasha, and therefore it doesn't sound proper to tell us exactly how many years he lived. Says the Gemara, Kedei liyachis bohen shnoisov shel Yaakov. It's only because we know how long Yishmael lived that we can work out where Yaakov was and when. Dichsiv, since it says in the Pasuk, Ve'ele shnei chaye Yishmael ma'as shana u'shloishim shana v'sheva shanim. We know that Yishmael lived 137 years. Kama koshish Yishmael mi Yitzchok. Arbeisar Shnin. Yishmael was 14 years older than Yitzchok. Dichsiv, as it says in the Pasuk, Ve'avram ben shmeinim shana v'shei shanim beledes hogoras Yishmael le'avram uchsiv ve'avram ben ma'as shana be'ivalid le'es Yitzchok b'noi. Avram was 86 years old when Yishmael was born, and 100 years old when Yitzchok was born. So we know that Yishmael was 14 years older than Yitzchok. Uchsiv ve'Yitzchok ben shishim shana beledes Eisam. When Yaakov and Esav were born, Yitzchok was 60 years old. Bar kama havi Yishmael kedis yalid Yaakov. How old was Yishmael when Yaakov was born? Bar shivin v'arba. He was 74 years old. Kama posyon mishnei. How many more years did Yishmael have to live after Yaakov was born? Shetin utlas. 63 years. V'tani, we learned in a brayse, Hoyo Yaakov Avinu b'shor shenizborich me'aviv ben shishim v'shalei shana. When Yaakov got the brachos from Yitzchok, he was 63 years old. Uboi ba'perek meis Yishmael. And in that period of time is when Yishmael died. Dichsiv, as it says in the Pasuk, Vayar Esav ki berich Yitzchok es Yaakov, v'goimer, Vayelech Esav el Yishmael, Vayikach es mocholas bas Yishmael, achois nevoyos, al noshov lo leisha. It was soon after Yitzchok gave Yaakov the brachos that Esav went to Yishmael and married Yishmael's daughter Mochlas. So we know at that point Yishmael was still alive. Umimashma shenemar, from the fact that it says in the end of the pasuk Bas Yishmael that Mochalas was the daughter of Yishmael, why is that not enough to know that she was obviously the sister of Nevoyos? All the children of Yishmael are listed out in the psukim before that. So from here we see that when Esav married Mochalas, the stage of Kiddushin, Yishmael was there. Umeis, and Yishmael died before the Chasna. V'yisia Nevoyos achia, and her brother Nevoyos married her off. So you see that Yishmael died around the time that Yaakov got the brachos. So we see from there that Yaakov was 63 when he got the brachos. Continues the Gemara, Shitin utlast, 63 years of Yaakov when he got the brachos. Va'arbeisar, and the 14 years that he was by Lovon working for Leah and Rachel, his wives. Ad misyalid Yosef, until Yosef was born. Hoshivin v'shiva, 77 years. Uchsiv Yosef ben shloishim shana ba'omdoi lifnei pari. Homea v'sheva, which means that when Yosef became king, Yaakov was 107 years old. Shev de Sova, then there were 7 years that were plentiful, from Pari's dream, which is when Yosef became the Mishneh Lemelech, V'tarti de Kafno, and another 2 years of hunger. Homea v'shitza. At that point, Yaakov came to Mitzrayim to be with Yosef for the rest of his life, and he was 116 years old at that point. Uksiv, and it says in the Pasuk, Vayome Pari ad Yaakov kama yomei shnei chayecha. When Pari asked Yaakov how old he was, Vayomer Yaakov el Pari yomei shnei megurei shloishim u'ma'as shana. I'm 130 years old. According to the cheshbon we just made, he was 106 years old. How could Yaakov say he was 130 years old? Me'er v'shitzer havyon. He was 116. Eloshma mino, from here we see Arba Esrei Shnin Tihava Bebeis Eiver Loi Choshev Luhu. After Yaakov left Yitzchok's house, before he went to Lovon, he went to Eiver to learn Torah there for 14 years. And we only found this out because of the discrepancies that we knew with the cheshbonos of Yishmael. The Tanya, we also saw in a Brisa, Hoyo Yaakov bebeis Eiver mutmon 14 shana. Yaakov was hidden in the yeshiva of Eiver 14 years. Eiver meis la'achar sheyorad Yaakov Avinu la'aram na'araim. Eiver only passed away after Yaakov left to go to Lavan, shtei shanim. Which means 2 years after Yaakov left, Eiver was nifta. Yotza misham ubaloi la'aram na'araim. Yaakov left the base medrash of Eiver and got to Aram na'araim. Nimtza k'she'omad ala be'er, when Yaakov stood by the be'er, that's when he first met Rachel, ben shivim v'sheva shana. He was 77 years old. And then there was 14 years till Yosef was born, and Yaakov was 91 at the time. 30 years later, Yosef became the Mishnah Lemelech when Yaakov was 121. And then there were 7 years that were plentiful and 2 years of drought, which brought Yaakov to 130 years, exactly what it says in the Pasuk. Continues the Gemara. Uminalon deloi me'enesh. How do we know that Yaakov Avinu was not punished, that those 14 years he was not near his parents? The Tanya we saw in the Brisa, Nimtza Yosef Shapirash Me'aviv Esrim Mushtayim Shana. From the time that Yosef was sold until Yaakov went down to Mitzrayim was 22 years. Kashem Shapirash Yaakov Avinu Me'aviv. The same length of time from when Yaakov went to the house of Lavan and didn't see his parents. Asks the Gemara, the Yaakov Tlosin V'shita Havyon. Yaakov was away for 36 years, 14 in Beis Eiver, and another 22 until he got home, as we're going to see soon. Elo arba esrei dehava bebeis Eiver lo yichoshev lehu. Yaakov was only punished to not have Yosef by his side 22 years, for 22 years that Yaakov was not by the side of his parents, Yitzchok and Rivka. But the 14 years that he was in Shem V'Eiver, he was not punished for. From here you see that Talmud Torah is even greater than Kibud Avim. Asks the Gemara, Soif, to base Lavan, Eschim, Shnin Havyon. The time that Yaakov was by Lavan was 20 years, not 22. He was there for 14 years working for Rachel and Leah, and another 6 years that he was working with the tzoin, with the sheep. On the way from Aram Naraim back to his father, the journey took 2 years. The Tanya, as we saw in the Brisa, Yotza me'Aram Naraim, he left Aram Naraim to go back to his father. He came to a place called Sukkos. He waited there for 18 months. Shneimar, as it says in the Pasuk, V'Yaakov nosor Sukkosa, V'yiven lo bois, u'lemikneu osor Sukkos. He made twice a sukkah for summers and once a bayis for the winters. That's 18 months. U'bebeis el osor shisha chadoshim. He was held up in Beis El for another 6 months. V'hikriv zvachim. That's why he built the Mizbeach and shechted korbanos. And those are the extra 2 years before Yaakov got home, and that's why he was punished for 22 years. Hadron aloch perek Megillah nikras. B'siyata d'shmaya perek beis of Masechet Megillah, says the Mishnah, Hakoire es ha-Megillah lemafreya lo yotza. From Rashi in Brachos Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph and Rashi in Sotah Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, it would seem that the way Rashi would explain Hakoire lemafreya, reading the Megillah backwards, that lo yotza, it means that he starts reading Zaroi lechol sholoim v'doiver la'amoy, all the way till he gets to the beginning of the Megillah, where he says Hamoilech Achashverosh hu Achashverosh b'yemei vayehi. He reads it word by word, starting at the end. Others say it means that you started from the last pasuk and then you read the second last pasuk. Others say that it means you're reading the last perek and then the second last perek. Either way, the Megillah has to be read in order, from beginning to end. Continues the Mishnah, Koro al peh, if you read the Megillah by heart, not from within a Megillah, from the klaf, or that the Megillah was written in front of him in Lashon HaKodesh, and he read it in a different language, this will become apparent on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph. Kra or Targum, if the Megillah was written and read in Aramaic, which is a foreign language, a language that the person reading and listening to the Megillah does not understand, B'chol Lashon, and Kol Shkein, if it was not written in the Targum, in Aramaic, which is a more Choshev Lashon, it was written in any of the other Lashonos, and read in that Lashon, Lo Yotza, he's not Yotza. And the reason is because it's important that a person understands the language that he's reading the Megillah. Aval Koirin Oisa, Lo Yazois. For those who don't understand Lashon HaKodesh, they can read from a Megillah written in a foreign language if it's a language that the person reading and listening to the Megillah understands. V'haloyes sheshoma ashuris. If somebody does not really understand Lashon HaKodesh. But the Megillah was written from a normal kosher Megillah that we know, written in Lashon HaKodesh, and read in Lashon HaKodesh. Yotza is Yotza, continues the Mishnah, Kro'o Sirugin, if you read it bit by bit, you read a bit, and then he stopped, and then you read a bit more, and he stopped again, Umisnamnim, or if you read it when he wasn't completely awake, he was like dozing off, but he was reading it. Yotza, in both these cases, he's Yotza. In the case of Misnamnim, Tachlis, he wasn't asleep, he's Yotza. And if you read it, Sirugin, where he had breaks in between one section and the next, there's no reason that he shouldn't be Yotza, and we'll see in the Gemara what the Chiddush is. There are some Rishonim who say this is one case, that Sirugin or Misnamnim means that he stopped and dozed off in between one part and the next. It's one halacha that he's Yotza. Continues the Mishnah, Hoya Koisva, if a Sefer was writing a Megillah with another Megillah in front of him that he was reading from Pasuk by Pasuk, or Dorsha, if a Chacham was darshning every Pasuk of the Megillah one after the next, saying droshes on each Pasuk, it's not a hefsek, it's part of the Pirsum Nisa. Umagia, or if somebody was reading through a Megillah in order to check that there were no mistakes in it, then the halacha is, im kivein liboy, if he had in mind to be Yotza, Kriyas HaMegillah, Yotza then is Yotza. Ve'im lav, but if he was reading it without the intentions of being Yotza, Kriyas HaMegillah, he just had in mind either the writing, or the drosha, or the magia, lo Yotza, he's not Yotza because we can assume that he did not read it accurately. And therefore, even according to the Manda Omar that says mitzvahs are not tzrichos kavana, since we assume he did not read it accurately, he's not Yotza. The Torah Even assumes that even the Manda Omar that says regularly mitzvahs don't need kavana, especially mitzvahs drabanon, but Megillah is different. And the Sfas Emes explains, since the purpose of Kriyas HaMegillah is Pirsum Hanes, if he did it without having any kavana, then there was no Pirsum Hanes. Continues the Mishnah. Hoisa ksuva besam. If the Megillah was written with an ink called sam, ubesikra, ubekoimois, ubekankantoim, different types and colors of ink, al hanyor, v'ala diftera, and he wrote it on paper or types of parchment that have not been prepared as they should have, lo yotzo is not yotza kriyas HaMegillah, ad shetehi ksuva ashuris, until it's written in Lashon HaKodesh, that even if one did not understand every word of the Megillah, because the people listening or reading the Megillah are foreign to Lashon HaKodesh, however, since it's been written and read in Lashon HaKodesh is yotza, as we're going to see on Daf Yotes Amud Aleph. Others say that even if it's written in a different language, the letters, the font, has to be an Ashuris font. Al-Hasefa, it has to be written on kosher klaf, ubidyoy with ink, which is black, and has all the halachas of ksivas stam. Says the Gemara, Minoha Nemili, what's the source that a Megillah that's written out of order is not Yotza? Says the Gemara, Omar Rova, the Omar Cross, since it says in the Pasuk, Kimu v'kiblu Yehudim aleim v'goymer liyos oisim es shnei hayomim ha'ele kichsavom v'chizmanom. We compare the ksavom to the zmanom, mazmanom, since the 2 days lemafrea loy, they're always 14th is before the 15th. Av ksavom, so too, reading the Megillah that's written, it must be read in the order that it's written, lemafrea loy, and not out of order. Says the Gemara, that's not a good source. Midi kriya ksivacha. The pasuk's not talking about reading the Megillah. The pasuk is talking about the time and the writing. Asiya ksiva. Since that very pasuk starts with Ilhiyos oisim es shnei yomim ha'elo kichsavom v'chizmanom. Whatever we learn out from ksavom and zmanom applies to doing Purim, not to reading the Megillah. Elo, says the Gemara, the source that you're not allowed to read the Megillah out of order is mehacha from here. Dechsiv, it says in a different pasuk, v'hayomim ha'ile nizkorim v'nasim. Nizkorim, the way we remember the nisim is reading the Megillah. V'nasim is the mitzvahs hayoim, referring to the Suda and the Simcha and the Matanos Levyonim and the Mishleach Monos. Iskash Zechira la'asiyah, we compare the Zechira to the Asiyah. Ma'asiyah lemafre'a loi, in the same way as doing the mitzvahs have to be on the right day, and you can't do them out of order. If you do the mitzvahs on Yud Gimel, you're not Yotza. So to Av Zechira, regarding reading the Megillah, lemafre'a loi, it cannot be done out of order. Now the Gemara is going to bring a few other mitzvahs that cannot be done out of order. Tana, we learned in the Brisa that when the Brisa, the Tosefta in Masechet Megillah brings our Mishnah that Hakiris HaMegillah Lamafreya Lo Yatsa, the Brisa adds on V'chein B'Halil, reading Halil on Yomim Tovim, V'chein B'Kriyas Shema Ubitfila. When we have a chiyuv every day of reading Kriya Shema and davening Shemona Esra, all of them must be done in the right order, and if done in the wrong order, one is not Yotza. The Gemara explains, Halil Minolon, where do we know that one must not read Halil out of order? Rava Omar, Rava says the Makir is Dechsiv, Mimizrach HaShemesh Ad Mevoyoi, Mehulal Shem Hashem. One of the psukim at the beginning of Halil compares praising Hashem, which is called Hilul, to the Mizrach HaShemesh Ad Mevoyoi, to the path of the sun. In the same way as the sun has a very fixed path and never goes backwards, so too Halil has to be read in order and not out of order. Rav Yosef Omer, Rav Yosef explains a different makir from where we learn that Halil has to be said in order. It says in the pasuk, Zeh hayoim oso Hashem, in the same way as the day is made up of hours that go in order, they never go backwards, so too the Halil has to be said in order. Rav Avya Omar, a third makir, it says in Halil, Yehi Shem Hashem Mevayrach. Yehi means in the way it was initially formed. In the same way as the Parokim were written in a specific order, that's the way Hashem has to be praised with those Parokim, and not out of order. Rav Nachman by Yitzchok v'itema Rav Acher by Yaakov Omar, Mehocha, from a different pasuk, it says, Yehi Shem Hashem Mevayrach me'ato v'ad olam, that we will bless Hashem's name from now forever. In the same way as time, which is from now forever, has a sequence and will never be reversed, so too Halil has to be said in the right order. Now the Gemara is going to bring a makir that Kriyas Shema has to be said in order. Says the Gemara, Kriyas Shema, the Tanya we learnt in a Brisa, Kriyas Shema kich sovo. Kriyas Shema has to be read in the way it is written, only in Lashon HaKodesh. Divrei Rabbi, that's the opinion of Rabbi. V'chachomim oimrim, the Chachomim argue and say, B'chol Loshen, any language which the person saying Shema understands, he can say Shema. My Talmud Rabbi, what's the makir to Rabbi who says that Kriya Shema has to be said in Lashon HaKodesh? Omar Kro, it says in the pasuk, V'hoyu hadvarim ha'ele, B'havyason Yehu, exactly in the way that they were initially written in the Torah, that's the way it has to be said. V'Rabbanon, the Chachomim who argue with Rabbi and say they can be said in any language, my Tamai, what's their source? Omar Kro, it says in the pasuk, Shema Yisrael, B'chol loshen shato shemea. Shema doesn't just mean hear, it means understand. Any language that's understandable to the person saying Shema is the language that he can say Shema in. Asks the Gemara of Rabbi Nami Hoksiv Shema. Rabbi also agrees that it says the word Shema, which seems to say, like the Chachomim say, that Shema could be said in any language. But Rabbi holds that Shema has to be said in Lashon HaKodesh. Says the Gemara, Hahu mi boyele, Rabbi learns from the word Shema, a halacha, hashmei le'oznecho ma she'ata motzei mipicha, that the words you're saying from your mouth have to be heard by the ear. The Rabbanon who use the word Shema to teach us that Shema can be said in any language, how do they know this halacha that you have to actually hear what you're saying? Sovra Commander Omar, they hold, like Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, who argue in this prat on Rabbi Yossi, and they hold that Hakiris HaShema v'lo yishmi'a le'oznoi yotza. Even though he cannot hear the words he's saying, nonetheless he's been yotza krishma. Continues the Gemara of Rabbanon Nami Hoksiv V'hoyu. The word V'hoyu that Rabbi used to say that Shema has to be read in Lashon HaKodesh, what do the Rabbanon do with that word? They hold that Shema can be read in any language. Says the Gemara, Hahu mi boyelei shelo yikro lemafreya. V'hoyu means it has to be read in the way it's written, not meaning in the language it's written, but meaning in the order that it's been written. Asks the Gemara of a Rabbi who uses the word v'hoyu to say that Shema has to be read in Lashon HaKodesh, shelo yikro lemafreya minoli, where does he know that you cannot read the Shema out of order? Answers the Gemara, midvorim, hadvorim. It could have said v'hoyu dvorim. Why does it have to say v'hoyu hadvorim? To teach us that they have to be said in the right order. V'Rabbanon, what do the Rabbanon do with this extra hey? Dvorim hadvorim lo mashmelahu. It didn't seem to the Chachomim that this extra hey was put there for a drosha. So even though Rabbi and the Rabbanon argue whether one has to actually hear the words of Kriya Shema, or whether Kriya Shema can be said in any language, they do not argue to the fact that it has to be read in order. The question is just, do they learn it out from the word v'hoyu, or is it learnt out from the extra hey? And now that we've seen there was a machlokes whether Krishma has to be said in Loshna Kodesh or in any language, says the Gemara, Leime Kosova Rebbe Kol HaTorah Kula B'Kol Loshen Nemra. Could it be that the Kriyas HaTorah that we read regularly in the shul can be done in any language according to Rabbi? If you're going to say B'Loshna Kodesh Nemra that Kriyas HaTorah always has to be said in Loshna Kodesh, Lama li lemichtav v'hoyu. Why do I need the word v'hoyu to teach us that Krishma has to be said in Loshna Kodesh? Why should it be different to any other Kriyas HaTorah? Answers the Gemara, Yitzchok, I need the extra word v'hoyu to teach me about Krishma. So I might have thought Shema, that the word Shema K'Rabbanon is telling us what the Rabbanon learned from the word Shema, that it can be read in any language understood by the one saying Kriya Shema, Kosav Rachmona V'hoyu. That's why the Pasuk says V'hoyu, to say that's not what the word Shema is coming to teach us, and Kriya Shema has to be read in Loshna Kodesh like every Kriyas HaTorah. Continues the Gemara, Leime Kasavri Rabbanon Kol HaTorah B'Loshna Kodesh Nemra. Can we assume that according to the Chachomim, Kriyas HaTorah always has to be said in Loshna Kodesh, and that's why we need a special Pasuk to say that Krishma can be said in any language? If you're going to say B'chol Loshen Nemra, that Kriyas HaTorah can always be done in any language, why do I need Shema to say that Krishma could be said in any language? Says the Gemara, no, it's no proof, Yitzchok. Even if Kriyas HaTorah can always be done in any language, we still need the pasuk of Shema to say that Krishma can be said in any language. So I might have thought V'hoyu, Rebbe, that the word V'hoyu is learned like Rebbe, that it has to be said in Loshna Kodesh, Kosav Rachmon Shema. That's why we need the word Shema to say that Krishma can be read in any language. So we have no Mekoir regarding Kriyas HaTorah from a Sefer Torah, whether it has to be done in Loshna Kodesh or can be done in any language, neither according to the Chachomim nor according to Rabbi. Now the Gemara goes back to find the Mekoir that Shmoina Esrei Tefillah has to be said in order. Tefillah minolon, what's the Mekoir? The Tanya we saw in a Brisa, Shimon Hapakuli Hizdir Shmoina Esrei Brachos Lifnei Rabban Gamliel Al Haseder B'Yavna. It was Shimon Hapakuli who used to sell wool called Pakula. He was the one that arranged the Shmoina Esrei, and he did it in front of Reb Gamliel in the order that we're about to discuss, and he did it in a place called Yavne. And since he used psukim to determine the order of Shmoina Esrei must be said in that order. Omer Rabbi Yochanan, v'omri lo b'masnita tana. Some say this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, others in the name of a brisa. Me'al v'estrim zekenim, 120 of the Anshe Knesset Hagdaila, ubahem kamu navim, amongst them a number of prophets. Tiknu Shmoina Esrei brachos al haseder. They were the ones that arranged the Shmoina Esrei in the order that we know it. Also learning it from psukim. And since they were arranged by the Nevi'im who learnt it from Psukim, it has to be said in that order. Now the Gemara is going to teach us where in the Psukim we find the Shmoina Esrei in the order that we know it. Ton Rabbanon, we learnt in the Brisa, Minayin Sha'imrim Ovois. What's the Mekoir to the first bracha of Shmoina Esrei that called Ovois? Shenemer, as it says in the Pasuk, it's actually a perek in Tehillim where it says 18 times Hashem's name. This is mentioned in Brachos Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis. Havu LaHashem b'nei Elim. You Klal Yisrael, the descendants of Avraham, Yitzchok and Yaakov, called Elim, strong ones, should bring in front of Hashem, Havu LaHashem, the Schus HaOvos. And since the first time it says Hashem's name in this perek, that's why the first bracha is the one that mentions the Schus Ovos. Uminayin sha'omrim gvuros. How do we know that after the bracha of Ovos we say the bracha of Ato Gibor, which is called gvuros? Shenemar, since it says the second time it says in that perek Hashem's name, Havu LaHashem kavod v'oiz, and we know that oiz is gvura. Uminayin sha'omrim kedushos. How do we know that the bracha of Ato Kodesh follows that? Shenemar, since it says in the Pasuk, Havu LaHashem kvoid shemoy, hishtachavu LaHashem behadras kodesh. That one should say in front of Hashem the kvoid shemoy, and kvoid shemoy is to do with kodesh, as it says at the end of the Pasuk, behadras kodesh. That's the Mekoir that you say Ato Kodesh as the third bracha. So since it says 3 times, Havu LaHashem, bring in front of Hashem the first 3 times it says Hashem's name in that perek. The first one being B'nai Elim, Zchus Avos. The second one being Kavod V'oiz, being Ato Gibor. The third one being Kvod Shemoi, which is Kodesh Ato Kodesh. Continues the Gemara, Moro Loimar Bina Achar Kedusha. What's the source that you say Atochinen, where we mentioned Bina, Melamed Lenush Bina, after the bracha of Ato Kodesh? Shenemar, since it says in the Pasuk in Yeshaya, V'kdishu es Kedosh Yaakov, V'eselukei Yisrael Ya'aritzu. That's a pasuk that speaks about Kedusha, referring to Ato Kodesh. V'samechle, and immediately after that it says V'yod'u to'ei ruach bina. And since the pasuk there in Yeshaya mentions the bina after Kedusha, the bracha of Ato Chonein is the 4th bracha in Shmoneh Esrei. Why is the bracha of Hashivenu after the bracha of Ato Chonein? Since it says in the pasuk in Yeshaya, Ulevavo Yovin v'shav v'rafaloi. After Havana is tshuva. Ihochi, if so, leimer refuah, basra de tshuva. If so, the bracha after Hashivenu should be refuenu, since the pasuk says levava yovin v'shav v'rafaloi. The refuah is after tshuva, and in our Shmoneh Esrei we know that slicha is in between. Says the Gemara, lo yisal kedaitach. No, refuah does not follow straight from tshuva. D'chsiv, since it says in another pasuk, Ya'azov Rosho Darkoi, Vish Oven Machshavoisov, V'yoshoy Vel Hashem V'irachameu, Vel Elokeinu Ki Yarbe L'Sleach. Immediately after tshuva is slicha. That's why the bracha of slach lanu is the one that follows after Hashivenu, and only after that is the bracha of refuah. Asks the Gemara, why do you rely and base yourself on the pasuk that says V'yoshev el Hashem v'irachameu v'elelikeinu ki yarbe l'sleach, in order to put slicha after tshuva? Smoichaha, why don't you follow the pasuk we mentioned before, V'shav v'rafaloi, that after tshuva should be rafaenu? Answers the Gemara, Kosav Krachrina, there's another pasuk that says, Hasoileach l'chol avoinechi, Hareife l'chol tachaluoichi, Hagoyel mishachas chayechi. That refuah is after slicha. Stanchik Nesak Deila understood from there that first we say Slach Lonu, and only after that we say Rafa'enu. Asks the Gemara Lememra, the Geula or Refuah, Basar Slichahi? Can it be that indeed the bracha of Geula and the bracha of Refuah is after the bracha of Slach Lonu? V'oksiv, it says in the pasuk, V'shav v'rafaloi, that refuah comes after tshuva. So the bracha of Rafa'enu should be after the bracha of Hashivenu, before the bracha of Slach Lanu. Answers the Gemara, Hahu, this pasuk of V'shav v'rafaloi, lav refuah de tachaluim hi. It's not referring to refuah of the guf, which is what we know as Rafa'enu. Elo refuah de slichahi. It is the bracha we know as Slach Lanu. The Slach Lanu is called a form of refuah, not a refuah of the guf, but a refuah of the neshama. Continues the Gemara, Ma ra'u loimar geula b'shvius. Why is the bracha of geula, Goel Yisrael, the 7th bracha, and refuah the 8th? It should be first refuah and then geula, like it says in the pasuk, Hasoleach l'chol avoinechi, Haroife l'chol tachaluoichi, Hagoel mishachas chayechi. Explains the Gemara Omarava, Mitoich she'asidim ligoel b'shvius. The sugya called geula is a shvius diga sugya, therefore it belongs as the 7th bracha. Lefikoch kavua b'shvius, that's why it's the 7th bracha of Shmoneh Esrei. Even though in this bracha we don't actually daven for Klal Yisrael's geula, rather we daven from the geula of each and every person's tzoros. But since it's called Goel Yisrael, it's associated with the geula, and therefore it's the 7th bracha. Asks the Gemara V'Omar Mar, did we not learn in the Braisa, B'shishis Koilos, in the 6th year of Shemitah, Koilos will be heard announcing Mashiach's coming. B'shvius Milchomois, in the Shemitah year there'll be wars. But Moitza Shvius ben David Bo, and Mashiach will come the year after Shemitah. That's the 8th year, not the 7th year. Answers the Gemara, Milchome Namias Chalto du Geulahi. The Milchomes that are going to be in the Shemitah year, in the 7th year, are part and the beginning of the Geula, and therefore the bracha of Geula can remain associated with the 7th year, and Mamela with the 7th bracha. Continues the Gemara, Ma ra'u loimar refuah b'shminis. Since refuah is not immediately following slicha, what was the makir that it was put immediately after geula? That's how the Ritva explains the Gemara. Umar ra'u loimar refuah b'shminis, amar ba'acha mitoich shenitna mila b'shminis. Since Mitzvah's Milah is on the 8th day. Shetzricha refuah, and we know that the mitzvah of Milah requires some form of refuah. Lefikach kavua b'shminis, that's why the bracha of refuah is associated to the 8th and is the 8th bracha in Shmoneh Esrei. Umaro loimar birchas hashonim, why is the bracha of Mevorech Hashonim Batshiyas the 9th bracha in Shmoneh Esrei? Omer of Alexandri, keneged mafkiei she'orim. Tichsiv shvoir zeroya rosha. The Rishonim who tried to take money from the poor people by raising the price of Tevuah, David HaMelech davened that there should be so much Tevuah around that they should not be able to do that. David ki Amra, when did David HaMelech ask Hashem that there should be so much Tevuah that those growing the Tevuah, Rishonim amongst them, should not be able to charge exorbitant prices for the Tevuah? But he said it in the 9th Perek of Tehillim. Marsha explains that even though it's in Perek Yud of Tehillim, but the Gemara in Brachos Daf Tesamud Beis determines that the Perek of Ashrei Ho'ish being Perek Aleph and Lo Marok Shel Goyim being Perek Beis is one Perek. In which case it turns out that what we know as Perek Yud is really Perek Tes. In Rashi and Tosfos it seems that Perek Tes and Perek Yud were one Perek. And since this pasuk belongs to Tehillim Perek Tes, therefore the bracha of Birchas Hashonim is the 9th bracha. Continues the Gemara, Maro loimar kibutz goliyos, why is the bracha of Makabitz Nidchei Amo Yisrael la'achar Birchas Hashonim, after the bracha of Mevorech Hashonim? Tichsev, since it says in the pasuk, Va'atem horei Yisrael anpechem titenu uperyechem tisu la'ami Yisrael ki kirvu lovoi. After the pasuk speaks about how fruitful the trees will be, it speaks about Klal Yisrael coming back to Eretz Yisrael, and that's why after the bracha of Mevorech Hashonim we have the bracha of Kibbutz Goliyos. Continues the Gemara, V'kivan sheniskabtzu Goliyos, and since Klal Yisrael have come back to Eretz Yisrael, Naaseh din b'Roshoim. That's when Hashem is going to judge those Roshoim that are intermingled within Klal Yisrael. Shenemar, as it says in Yeshaya, V'oshiva yodi olayich, v'etzroif kaboir sigoich, v'osira kol b'diloich. That once Klal Yisrael come back, Hashem is going to separate the Rishonim from the rest of Klal Yisrael. Uchsiv, and the few psukim after that it says, V'oshiva shoiftayich kvar Rishono, v'yoyatzayich kvat chila, acharei cheini kori loch ir hatzedek kiryo nemono, tzion b'mishpat tipode, v'shoveo b'tzedakah. So you see from the Seder Psukim, first Klal Yisrael will come to Eretz Yisrael, that's Kibbutz Goliyos, then the Rishonim will be separated, and once the Rishonim are separated, then the Shoftim, those who are leading and judging Klal Yisrael, will be righteous Kabar Rishono like they were originally, and that's why the bracha of Hashiva Shoftenu Kabar Rishono V'yatzenu Kvat Chila is immediately after the Kibbutz Goliyos. Continues the Gemara, V'kivan shenaaseh din min HaRishoim, since the Rishoim from within Klal Yisrael have been judged, Kolu HaPoishim, all those who are undermining Klal Yisrael and their emunah will be destroyed. And that's why the bracha called Birchas Haminim, what we know as V'lamal Shinim, was later put into Shmoneh Esrei immediately after the bracha of Hashiva Shoftenu. V'koilul Zaydim Imoim, and the bracha that speaks about the Poishim, which are the Minim, the Apikorusim, included with the Zaydim, Shenemar V'shever Poishim V'chatoim Yachtov V'oiz V'Hashem Yichlu. There's a lot of girsois here because of the tzenzah. What the Gemara means here is the bracha against the Talmidim of Yeshu, Christians, and the Romans, those responsible for our Golus. Continues the Gemara, V'kivan shekolu HaPoishim, since all the Koifrim, the Poishim that we mentioned are all going to be destroyed. Mamela Misrei Memes Keren Tzadikim. The name of the Tzadikim will be brought back to its original fame and pride. Tichsiva v'chol karnei Rishoim agadea teroi mamno karnei tzadik. After the karnei Rishoim will be destroyed, the karnei tzadikim will be nisroimim. And that's why after the bracha called Birchas Haminim is immediately the bracha of Ala Tzadikim. V'koilul Geirei HaTzedek Im HaTzadikim. In the bracha of Ala Tzadikim we also mention the Geirei HaTzedek, Shenema, since it says in the pasuk, B'pnei Seva Tokum, V'odarto Pnei Zokin, V'samich Lei. And immediately afterwards it says, V'chiyogur itcho ger ba'artzachem. Therefore we mention the Geirei HaTzedek together with the tzaddikim. Continues the Gemara of Heichon Nisroimem es Karnom. This Karnom of the tzaddikim that are going to be Nisroimem, where is that going to happen? B'Yerushalayim, in Yerushalayim. Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Sha'alu Shloim Yerushalayim, Yishloyu Oy Havoich. Yishloyu is the lotion of shalva, of peace, serenity, that the tzaddikim that are Oy Havei Yerushalayim are going to be deserving of this shalva. And that's why after the bracha of Ala Tzaddikim is the bracha of Boinei Yerushalayim. The Kivan Shanivnis Yerushalayim Bo David. Straight after Yerushalayim is going to be rebuilt, Mashiach ben David is going to come. Shenemar, since it says in the pasuk, Achar Yoshuvu b'nei Yisrael uvikshu es Hashem Elohihem ve'is David Malkom upochadu el Hashem ve'el Tuvoi ba'achris hayomim. And that's why immediately after the bracha of Boinei Yerushalayim is the bracha of Es Tzemach David. V'kivon she'ba David ba'os tefillah. With David comes tefillah, shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Vav yoisim el har kodshi v'simachtim b'beis tefilasi. First it mentions the har kodshi, which is the building of the Beis Hamikdash, which can only be done after a melech from the descendants of David HaMelech has been crowned. That's how the Maharsha explains this. And after Har Kodshi, it says Beis Tfilasi. That's why we say the bracha of Shemei Tfilah immediately after the bracha of Es Tzemach David. V'kivan sheba'as Tfilah ba'as Avodah. As soon as Tfilah is mentioned, Avodah in the Beis Hamikdash is mentioned. Shenemar, as it says in the Hemshech of that pasuk, Oy loisehem v'zivchehem l'rotzain al mizbechi. That after Tfilah, the bracha of Shemei Tfilah, comes the bracha of l'rotzain al mizbechi, which is the bracha of Rotzei, and v'hoshev esu Avodah. V'kivan sheba'as Avodah. After Avodah, Ba'as Toida. Comes Hoida, Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, Zoiveach Toida, Yechabdonani. Together with the Zoiveach comes Toida. The Zoiveach is the Avodah, that was the bracha of Rotzei. Immediately after that is the bracha of Hoida, which is the Moedim Anachnu Lach. Continues the Gemara, Umar Ro Loimar Birchas Koyanim Achar Hoida. Why is the Birchas Koyanim immediately after Moedim? Tichsiv, since it says in the pasuk by the Yemei Miluim, Vayiso Aaron es yodo ve'la'om, vayivorchem vayired me'asois hachatos v'ho'ilo v'ashlomim. Just like Aaron HaKohen benched Klal Yisrael immediately after he did the Avodah, so too in Tefillah, immediately after Avodah, the Kohanim bench Klal Yisrael. Asks the Gemara, if Birchas Kohanim is associated to Avodah, Eima Koidem Avodah, why don't we say Birchas Kohanim before the bracha of Shemei Tefillah? The Lashon HaPasuk that we mentioned was first, Vayisa Aaron es yodo ve'la'om, vayivarchem, and only afterwards it mentions the Asois HaChatos v'oilo v'ashlomim. Says the Gemara, Lo Sol Kedaitoch, that can't be. Tichsiv, the pasuk says, Vayered mea sois hachatos v'gomer. Mi ksiv, does it say in the pasuk, La sois? Does it say that Vayisa Aaron es yodo ve'la'om vayivorchem la sois hachatos, that after Birchas Kohanim they went to do the Avodah? No. Mea sois ksiv. It says that Vayisa Aaron es yodo ve'la'om vayivorchem vayered mea sois hachatos. After they did the korbanos, that's when they benched Klal Yisrael. Asks the Gemara, V'leimrei achar Avodah. Okay, so why don't we say Birchas Kohanim immediately after the bracha of Avodah before Moedim? In our Shemona Esra, Birchas Kohanim is after Moedim. Says the Gemara, Lo Sol Kedaitoch, that can't be. Tichsiv Zoiveach Toida. We already saw before that together with Avodah has to be Moedim. And since first is Avodah, with Avodah is Moedim, after Avodah is Birchas Kohanim, therefore Birchas Kohanim is immediately after Moedim. Asks the Gemara, why are you using the pasuk Zoiveach Toida to determine that Moedim has to be after Rotzei and Birchas Kohanim after Moedim? Smoich ahai. Why don't we rely on the pasuk that we mentioned before, that immediately after Avodah is the Birchas Kohanim? Says the Gemara, Mistabra, it's logical. Avodah v'hoidah choda milsehi. It's not just about the order. It's about the fact that Avodah and Moedim is one thing. And therefore, it makes sense that immediately after Avodah is Moedim, and only after Moedim is Birchas Kohanim. Continues the Gemara, Maro loimar sim sholem achar Birchas Kohanim. Why is the bracha of sim sholem after Birchas Kohanim? Tichsiv, Since it says in the Pasuk by Birchas Kehanim, V'somu es Shemiel b'nei Yisrael v'ani avorchim, that after the Kehanim bench Klal Yisrael, Hashem benches Klal Yisrael, Bracha Tekadosh Baruch Hu Sholem. The bracha that Hashem gives Klal Yisrael is the bracha of Sholem, Shenemar, as it says in the Pasuk, Hashem Yevorech es Amoy b'Sholem, and therefore immediately after Birchas Kehanim is the bracha of Sim Sholem. And now the Gemara goes back to the beginning of the sugya. V'chi me'achar d'mea ve'esrim zekenim, u'mehem kama neviim tiknu tefillah ala seder. Once it's been established that the 120 zekenim, including some neviim, established the seder of Shmoneh Esrei, based on these psukim, Shimon Hapakuli, my hizdir. We saw in a different brayso before that Shimon Hapakuli was the one that was Masada Shmoneh Esrei in front of Reb Gamliel. What did he do? The Seder was already there from the time of the Anshe Knesset Agdela. Says the Gemara, Shachachum. With the passage of time, the exact Seder of Shmoneh Esrei got forgotten. They used to daven Baal Peh. The Gemara in Shabbos Daf Kuf Tes Vav and Beis says that the brachas and tefillas were not allowed to be written down, and therefore they got forgotten. V'chazar v'sidrum. Then Shimon Hapakuli, he was the one that was mesader it again in front of Reb Gamliel, and was re-established the Seder. Now the Gemara finishes the sugya, Mikan ve'elech, after the Anshe Knesset Agdela established the order of the Shmoneh Esrei, also l'sapir b'shvochish l'Kadosh Baruch Hu. You're not allowed to add brachas into the Shmoneh Esrei. D'Omer Rabbi Elazar said, Ma'idach Siv, when the Pasuk says, Mi yamalel gvuros Hashem yashmi'a kol tehilosei, which the Pashup Shat means, who can praise Hashem? Who can say all the praises? But the Gemara darshans it, Lemi noe lemalel gvuros Hashem? Who has the permission to instate a bracha, a praise for Hashem? Lemi sheyochei lashmi'a kol tehilosei. Only somebody who can say all the praises of Hashem. And since nobody can say all the praises of Hashem, therefore it's asa to add a bracha into Shmoneh Esrei, and we have to stick to the nusach that Anshe Knesset Agdela taught us based on psukim. Omar Rabbi bar Bar Chona Omar Rabbi Yochanan, Hamasaper b'shvochi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu yoyse midai. If somebody says too many praises on Hashem, nekor min ha'olam, he'll get punished by death. Shenemar, as it says in the Pasuk, hayusupar loy ki adaber im omar ish ki yavula. Is it possible that I will be able to incorporate all the praise about Hashem? Certainly not. And the person that tries to do that will get destroyed from the world. Another drasha, Dorash Rabbi Yehuda ish kfar giboy raya, va'omri lo ish kfar giboy rechayel. Ma'idech siv, when it says in the Pasuk, L'cha dumio tehila, Eloikim b'tzion, how can silence, dumio, be praise, tehila? Samo de kaila, mashtuka. The most worthwhile sum, potion, cure, is silence. Since you can't say all the praises about Hashem, the best choice is just to keep quiet and to stick to those nuschos that Anshe Knesset Agdela were mesaken. Ki also Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came to Bovel, Omar, he said, Omri b'marova, the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, the Bnei Yeshiva, they said, Milo b'sela, if you want to buy words or value words, b'sela, with a coin called a sela, mishtuka b'train, it's better to buy silence with two such coins.